And I'm going to go ahead and say my famous line that I'm known for saying in these videos is that it's been a while since I've done one of these. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I'm aware of that. This time I think I've got kind of a valid excuse. The work situation here and the way the city is operating at this moment, it's kind of like I said before in the last video. It's kind of wonky where I'm living. They can't decide if they want to go back into full-blown lockdown. They can't decide if they want to go into a further reopening phase. And as a result, my job is still operating on a skeleton crew. And when it's operating on a skeleton crew, it's one of those situations where the work is all disorganized as far as being spread all over the place. You might come in to work at 8 o'clock in the morning one day. You might come in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon the next day. And then you might be off 2 days or 3 days and then back on for a couple of days. It's almost like an old comedy I saw one time. It's disorganized crime, you know. But anyway, one thing the lockdown has done is it's given me a chance to watch Netflix. I still haven't actually watched Tiger King yet, even though it seems everybody else on the planet has. But I probably, inevitably, curiosity is going to get the better of me, and I'm going to end up watching that. But I have been checking out some old movies again here lately, and I happened to stumble across Ray Milland in a couple of low-budget Roger Corman films from the early 60s. One was Premature Burial. One was about a guy with x-ray eyes. And you would have to like those great B-type budget films in order to enjoy them, even though I thought that Ray Milland as an actor was really impressive in those. Now, of course, he went from being a major Hollywood star back in the 30s and 40s to acting in low-budget horror like Frogs in the 1970s, and Frogs is not even a so bad it's good kind of film. It's just bad all the way around. But it got me curious because one of the big milestone films that he did in the 40s was called Lost Weekend, and I had never watched it. And I was a little bit hesitant to try and check it out because, you know, I had seen Days of Wine and Roses a long time ago, and it's just one big advertisement for AA. And I thought this one might be the same thing. It surprisingly is not, outside of the overall message that, you know, there is such a thing as an alcoholic, and the overall message that, you know, alcohol is bad for you and that there's an all or nothing solution to it, which is stop completely or, you know, whatever. But it's not a promotional film for AA. As a matter of fact, the main character that he's playing actually overcomes it himself because A, he's in love with someone, and B, he wants to be a successful writer more than he wants to be a drunk. So in the last scenes, he's like dropping a cigarette butt in his alcohol, using it as an ashtray. So, you know, you see obviously in the end when he makes the decision, he pours a drink and you think he's about to drink it and he drops a cigarette butt in it. It kind of shows that he's got a commitment to his newfound life. Now, of course, it's an open-ended type film. You don't know if he's not going to end up drunk again or not. Curiously enough, the guy who wrote that, originally it was in the form of a book. He bounced in and out of AA for a number of years before committing suicide with a drug overdose. So AA didn't work for him, obviously, but it was, I noticed in some research I was doing about him that he had a lot of serious problems in terms of, you know, he was bisexual, and this was during a time period where that was extremely taboo. And so he coped with a lot of depression and a lot of guilt and a lot of other things that would have probably, no doubt, antagonized the addiction that he had. I mean, it would be pretty horrifying to live in a world where where your sexual orientation would be criminalized. It always makes me wonder about the way it might have been in past decades. I know my aunt and my mother, who are a little bit closer to what you would call the silent generation, not the baby boomers, not the World War II, they were kind of in between, had talked about growing up in the 1950s. And they said it was nothing like the TV shows of the time, you know, the Leave It to Beaver, the Ozzie and Harriet, and all of that other kind of thing that I remember my mother said that her mother worked like 40, 50 hours a week at a dead-end job, that she didn't dress like June Cleaver, and that most of the people who went to church back in those days, they went to church because it was kind of a societal pressure to do so, not because everybody was overtly religious, and that, you know, the utopian ideal that was pictured with the nuclear family on television wasn't necessarily reality. Now, I don't know what it would have been like for this writer of this, and I'm going to get off topic if I keep going in that direction. But Lost Weekend is about a guy with a bad drinking problem. And there's a few lines in the film that of course I think anybody with an addiction problem could relate to. There's one scene where he talks about how intolerable the morning is, because the morning is the worst time on earth, when you see the sun coming up and your nerves are all over the place, and you just know you have to have a drink. And I can certainly relate to that. That's one bonus I found in not drinking any longer, is that you don't have to go through that miserable terror when you first wake up in the morning, when you're reaching for the bottle to drown that terror and those shakes and those sicknesses that are just plaguing you. I don't miss that at all. That's one thing I don't miss, but I could identify with what the character was saying in that scene. There's another scene where he talks about how he can do without alcohol if he absolutely has to, but just the thought of not being able to get to it is terrifying. And I know that feeling really well. There was times when I could actually maintain short, dry periods, I guess you could call them, for lack of a better term, but I had to know there was something on hand in case it got too out of whack. It was kind of funny. I haven't had a drink in a very long time, but I was listening to the radio station in my car the other day, and they were doing this breakdown on how many states have consumed massive amounts of alcohol since all this COVID lockdown thing was going on. And like I said, I haven't had a drink in a long time, but I remember around April, when things were just really in really tight lockdown, the first thought that crossed my mind at one point, it wasn't like an obsessive thought, but it went through my mind, are they going to close the liquor stores? Because even though I have no intention to drink, and I don't even think about drinking hardly at all, there was still this little part of me that was like, well, in case it gets bad enough and I want to drink, I need to have the assurances I can get to one. But the film is actually not the topic of this video. What the film got me to thinking about, because like any time I see a film and it kind of intrigues me, or it interests me in some kind of way, I'll go look up the trivia behind it, or more information about it. I almost always do that if a film is interesting. And it turned out the alcohol industry at the time spent a whole lot of money to try to suppress this film. They didn't want this film to get produced. They didn't want this film to get shown. And of course, I can kind of see the point for the time period, because it portrays people who drink in a very negative light. And it kind of pushes the stereotypical alcoholic thing that AA perpetuates. He steals. In one scene, he tries to steal a wallet from a lady so he can buy some more booze, or he does, a few things that the stigma of what being an alcoholic is, or what having an addiction problem is. And I think AA helps further perpetuate that. If you have a drinking problem, you're dishonest, you're a thief, you're a manipulator, you're a user, and all that other negative stereotype thing that they attach to it. But it's interesting, because at the time that the film came out, I can see why the alcohol industry would be concerned about it, because prohibition had not been over for almost, not even quite 20 years at the time. And so I can see where they might have been afraid that a bunch of moral Puritans and a bunch of temperance movements might have tried to push another political agenda to make alcohol illegal, although I think it's redundant today to even entertain the idea that any kind of prohibition works. But it's interesting, what that got me to thinking about was the fact that the alcohol industry wouldn't even worry about such films being made today, and have not worried about such films to my knowledge, since that film was made in the 40s. Probably because the alcohol industry knows that people are never going to stop drinking, and people are always going to keep drinking, and people are always going to have problems with drinking. Not everybody who drinks is going to have problems with it, but they pretty much know that it's almost like an American pastime, and then the rest of the developed world as well, people drink. But it got me to thinking about the fact that around the 1970s, I'd have to look up the precise dates, where this particular senator made it popular to start pushing for treatment and pushing for 12-step treatment industries. And around the time the 12-step monopoly got a stranglehold over everything. In fact, I've heard people even talk about how the 1980s was like the golden age of AA. And I do remember a lot of rehab commercials when I was growing up, and drug public service announcements, but I think that had more to do with the Reagan war on drugs than it did anything else. Just like we had all those after-school specials where, some teenager drinks a couple of beers, and then the next thing you know, he's shooting heroin, and then he's in rehab, and at the very end, he's in AA, and all is going well. But The point being is that if you took all the money that has been thrown at addiction, I'm just going to say from the 1970s to now, if you took all the money that the treatment centers have made, if you took all the money AA has made, even though AA tries to claim it doesn't make any money, which is comical and laughable, and you took the money that the drug courts have made, I don't know how far back in history those goes, you could probably take all of the profits off of that, and you could you could make a phone call to the president, and you could say, we got the deficit problem solved, we can just pay that off and still have plenty left over. It occurred to me that kind of like the alcohol industry was worried about The Lost Weekend, and they threw a lot of money at trying to stop that film from getting made because they was afraid it would hurt their industry. The treatment center industry, the drug court industry, the 12-step industry doesn't want this problem to go away. Just like I'm almost convinced that when it comes to some government entities that specialize in whatever's going on with drugs and with drug addiction and all that other kind of stuff, some people would say this is conspiracy theory sounding, but to be honest, it seems blatantly obvious they don't want this problem to ever go away or end. Because if it went away or it ended, or people just magically stopped being drunks, or people stopped magically having alcohol problems, they would be out of a job. They would be out of a multi-million-dollar career with a lot of the people at the very top. Now, I'm not talking about the average addiction treatment counselor, who I don't know what those people make that work in those treatment centers. However, it is an easy living for a lot of people that I knew who had zero qualifications whatsoever. They were just people that knew how to talk a lot of AA talk. Some of them that I used to encounter in drug court, I remember I used to kind of mentally wonder to myself, what exactly do these people have when it comes to psychiatric qualifications or even social worker style qualifications? They didn't seem to have any people skills. They didn't seem to have any, like a few therapists I've seen who actually ask questions and are interested in input and things like that. They didn't have any of that. All they did was quote 12-step garbage at you. I mean, it didn't matter what was going on with you. If you had real emotional trauma that you wanted to talk about, or you had a real life situation, things happening to you, they just started throwing things at you like, well, you probably need meetings. You probably need to, well, you know, do you even have a sponsor yet? Obviously you don't, or you wouldn't be miserable. Or they would throw at you, you know, just cliched slogans that come out of the literature. And I don't think those people, when you really sound it all down, are really interested in people getting any better either, because it is a career for them. It is a living that they make out of all of this. And when you think about the recidivism rates that go on in both in treatment and within drug courts and within the AA revolving door and everything like that, they've got a way to perpetuate their existence. And of course, with AA, they've got a real good monopoly over that, because even if you quit drinking for any period of time, even an extended period of time, you're in danger of getting drunk again. Okay, because you're never well. You just have a daily reprieve. You just need a spiritual solution of progress, not perfection. You notice you never see anybody in an AA meeting say, oh, I'm beyond the drink problem, you know, now, and I'm just coming to these meetings because it's my social life, and I enjoy talking shit at newcomers, which it really boils down to. You don't ever see anybody ever say they're beyond the drink problem. Even people with 30, 40 years will talk about how they're just a drink away. It's a real clever scam in one way, so you can never get better, no matter what. It's with you for the rest of your life. For the rest of your existence, you're hopelessly lost and always in danger of running to a liquor store and having a drink. Right? I mean, from now on, it's a good way of self-perpetuation, and it's a good way to keep that revolving door open, because when people who don't have knowledge of alternatives, and when people don't realize there are other solutions, and when people don't realize there's other ways out, if they relapse and they have a slip, they have that, all those negative voices that are going around in their head that's saying, you know, you might as well go on because you haven't hit bottom yet, or, you know, I get, you know, that feeling of, I don't know what caused me to do this. It must be because I'm an inherently terrible person who wasn't dependent upon God, or any of the other negative reinforcement that AA teaches you, and you just go running back to AA over and over again. And in fact, if you, like myself, I did that so long that AA just became a central part of my existence, to the point that I didn't even think about how I couldn't look objectively as to how tied up I was into that existence. Even when I was constantly picking up white chips, even when I was constantly finding myself in fucking emergency rooms and public intox charges to go to jail, and a couple of mental hospitals too, for good measure, if you want me to qualify my record. I was still just like a creature on autopilot. I just go straight back to the meetings. Convinced, I don't know if I was convinced there was even some solution in the meetings at one point. It was just something I did, something that I instinctively did. You know, I've read somewhere about people being creatures of habit, and I think that, you know, AA in of itself is almost like a habit. It's a habit that becomes very hard to break. It becomes hard to quit, especially when your whole identity is tied up in it, and especially when it controls you through fear and through self-loathing, for want of a better word. I mean, you can't ever take pride in yourself or have accomplishments in yourself. And any time you hear a voice in your head that gives you a positive feeling of encouragement, then they'll tell you that's your ego talking. They've got a good scam going on, because it's never going to possibly have any hope of ending, so long as it remains the only viable method that's pushed by the public. And it's a public that's very, very interested in keeping that perception going, because there's a lot of money to be made off of this. I've actually had this argument thrown at me a couple of times by AA people online in some of these groups. You know, I'll say I'm not going to get involved with these groups that have pro-AA people in them, but call it COVID-19 boredom, call it, I don't know, call it whatever you like. I'll end up inevitably going into one of them anyway. But I've had a lot of people throw at me here lately this idea that if AA is not the magic solution, then how come the courts order everybody there? How come the treatment centers preach AA? How come the main public knows AA is the solution? Because there's a lot of money to be made to it. This isn't a vast conspiracy theory where you've got a bunch of shadowy men hiding in some basement room somewhere with their suits and ties on and their black sunglasses and saying, you know, we have to keep AA going. We have to keep AA alive. It's not nothing so sinister as that. It's very, very obvious what it is. There's a lot of cash to be made here. I mean, if you really think about it, because I knew guys that were treatment center counselors that had all kinds of felonies and all kinds of other shit wrong with them, where they wasn't ever going to be able to get any kind of honest work. All you got to do is a year of schooling, and you got a guaranteed check for the rest of your life just telling people AA slogans. It's kind of funny to me that they have that tradition that says that, you know, they're forever non-professional, but, you know, the service centers may employ special workers. Well, I mean, I don't know about special workers, but I know about a big money-making cash operation that's going on, and it, you know, has the support of, say, the mainstream that promotes it, that helps keep it in perpetuation. When you really think about it, if you walked up to the average person on the street, I'm guessing if you said to the average person on the street, I haven't conducted this as an interview, so I don't know, I have no way of proving it, but I'm pretty much safely guessing. If you walked up to the average person on the street and you said, I have a friend who has a severe drinking problem, what do you think I ought to tell him to do? The first things they would say is, well, tell him he probably needs to go to rehab, tell him he probably needs to go to an AA meeting, you know, or they would push the tough love bullshit, you know, well, you need to just cut off all ties with him, you know, and let him suffer until, you know, until he agrees to go to treatment and all that other kind of thing. I've done kind of topics on tough love before. I think I need to do a complete video on one with my own experiences, because it was important to me to realize from my own background how much the tough love actually made me susceptible to 12-step bullshit. But that's another video for another time. So I guess I've ran out of things to say for this particular video. And I'm going to say it again, even though, you know, I'm probably lying and you're probably catching me in a lie. But I'm going to try not to make it be a whole entire other month before I do another one of these. Hopefully I can do one next week. Right now, with the way the schedules are working, who knows, it may change tomorrow. I'm kind of got an opportunity for Wednesdays, so I'm going to aim for some Wednesdays, since those seem to be my days off. And I guess I'll see you guys next time.